Hi, everybody. Welcome to another edition of Packers Unscripted from Packers.com. I am Mike Spofford, joined, as always, by my partner in crime, Weston Hodkowitz. We're coming to you here from our studios at Lambeau Field. Wes, 1 week of training camp is in the books, and the biggest news of training camp so far occurred between our last show and this show, and of course I'm talking about quarterback Jordan Love signed his finalized contract extension. He was back out there for Saturday's practice, the first padded practice, so he's been involved in 2 practices so far with the pads going on. It's nice to see things sort of getting back to normal, right? QB1 is out there, he's running the show, and here we go.
It was the ending that everybody wanted to see, and it was the ending that we got. And before we go into all the X's and O's, because there is a lot of this, and we saw it over the weekend in these padded practices, just what it means to have number 10 back out on the field, I want to step back for a second, because a lot of the interviews I've done with people, a lot of the things that have come up, everybody's asking about the X's and O's and all that stuff. I just want to pull it back for 2 seconds and just appreciate what this moment represents. The Green Bay Packers made Jordan Love one of if not the most compensated quarterback NFL player in this league's great illustrious history. 4 years ago, he was the first-round pick that Brian Gutekunst traded up to draft, had to come in and follow in the shadows of Aaron Rodgers. Last summer, the amount of pressure that was on this young man to succeed Aaron Rodgers, the fact that Brian Gutekunst had pushed his chips in on this player, the fact that Matt LaFleur, his QB school acumen, was invested into this young man. Tom Clements had come back and had coached this young man. And to see it work out for him, to see it work out for the organization, I just can't help but feel somewhat sentimental about this whole thing. Because as I told you before, Mike, this is the first quarterback, the first prospect, the first real investment that I've seen groomed in my current occupation. Aaron Rodgers was an MVP, a Super Bowl champion, when I started covering this team on a full-time basis in 2012. I got to watch brick by brick, piece by piece, in practices that were visible to no one in 2020, Jordan Love go from the guy that the Green Bay Packers were developing to the face of the franchise.
Yeah.
And to see him rewarded, knowing what he's been through on a personal level, knowing what he's done on a professional level, and the fact that in 4.5 years, Mike, this guy has not sidestepped once. He has done everything right from the very beginning. I feel somewhat emotional about that whole thing because there are people behind those face masks. There are families that are impacted by it. And for the Packers and Jordan Love to reach this resolution, I just felt like this is one of those type of things that 10, 15, 20 years down the line, you and I will be talking to grandchildren and other people about this because it's pretty special.
Yeah, it absolutely is special. It's very exciting. And I can give you the perspective, at least a little bit, of the last time that this happened, because I got here to Packers.com in 2006, which was Aaron Rodgers' second year in the league. I watched him as the backup to Brett Favre in 06 and 07, which were years 2 and 3 for Rodgers. And, you know, we've gotten the question in Insider Inbox, well, are the Packers are making this investment in Jordan Love after just half a season of like good football. Well, let me remind everybody that Ted Thompson, the former general manager, rest his soul, he made the commitment to Aaron Rodgers after 7 games as the starting quarterback in 2008. The Packers were 4-3. Aaron Rodgers, in essence, hadn't won anything yet. You know, Jordan Love earned a playoff spot, won a playoff game. Like, his accomplishments in year 1 as a starter surpassed those of Rodgers. But Ted Thompson had the courage of his convictions, the same as when he drafted him, had the courage of his convictions when it came time to make the decision to move forward with this guy as your franchise quarterback. And now Brian Gutekunst and Russ Ball and everybody in the Packers front office has done the same thing with Jordan Love. And I think it's a reminder. I've seen a few comments related to this in inbox. Perhaps you're posting one or I will post one here soon. for those who keep bringing up it's just half a season. And well, on the field, yes, it's half a season. But everybody who's involved in this decision has seen Jordan Love for the last 4+ years that he's been here. They know what they're getting. They know what they're investing in terms of the player, the person, the work ethic, the talent, whether it has always shown up on the field or not, all of those things. I mean, that's what this is all about. And as things go, I mean, you mentioned, being up there as, one of the highest paid, the next quarterback to sign the next big deal, which might be Dak Prescott, is probably going to surpass everybody else. I mean, being the highest paid doesn't last long in this league. That's just the nature of things. But the similarities, once again, in terms of the transition from Favre to Rodgers, now from Rodgers to Love, nothing is exact. It's not the same blueprint, but the similarities in how the Packers have gone about this and the timeline of, how they've made their decisions, it's been interesting to follow, and I think everybody is excited about what's to come here with Jordan Love as the face of the franchise.
And that's the coolest thing about it, Mike, because you go back and listen to the Packers now and talking about in 2007 how much they felt Aaron Rodgers they had something there. And now you're hearing more and more about Brian Gutekunst and Matt LaFleur talking about how in 2022 they thought Jordan Love, there was something there. Not just the Philadelphia game, how he performed in the preseason.
And it's the Dallas game in 2007 with Rodgers, right? And it was smaller sample size, but it was the Philadelphia game for Jordan Love that you go, okay, big stage, prime time, big time opponent. This wasn't just some preseason outing. Went out there and played and looked like he belonged in the upper echelon of NFL football players. And so now here we are.
And one of the things where I had a benefit over you on this, because you always cover the podium after games, I got to be in that locker room after the Packers. They did lose that game to the Eagles, but Jordan Love addressed the media in the locker room. And there wasn't this, I'm happy and it's awesome, and hey, I had this nice touchdown pass to Christian Watson and all this stuff. It was, no, we lost the game and I expected better, even though he played really well. And that's where, in my mind, it went off of, this guy, he's a different type of customer. So to bring it all back around and just to answer your original question to me, to hear Matt LaFleur talk about this is the guy that knows our offense inside and out now, he's the one that is the general out there on the field, you could see it on the practice field on Saturday, how different everything looked with Jordan Love out there. And it started a little slow. He didn't practice the first 5 days of camp. And there was going to be some rust to knock off, but by the end of the practice, him and Christian Watson, they were looking at what Jeff Hafley and the defense were doing. They drew up their own deep shot play. They connect on it for 47 yards, leads to a 4-play, 70-yard drive in 2 minutes to score a touchdown. And he's off and running once again. So in the National Football League, when people ask about these contracts and what guys are making now, if you have a quarterback, you have hope. And the Packers have hope. And because of that, there's a price tag attached to that. But what's good for the Green Bay Packers is they aren't just looking at it as, well, we're paying our quarterback. They're looking at it as, we're paying one of the top young players in this league right now. And they feel like there's still a lot more for him to uncover.
Yeah, well, getting to the on-the-field action since our last show and what we've seen at training camp, you mentioned the deep ball to Watson. I thought a little bit earlier than that in practice, after some rough moments and clearly some rust, as you mentioned, in the early part of that Saturday practice, it was, Love hit Jaden Reed on a crossing route. Then he hit Christian Watson on a crossing route. Then he scoops up a low shotgun snap by his ankles, and then fires a little sidearm flick to Romeo Doubs, right? And then there's Carl Brooks coming unblocked on a pass rush, and Love's reaction was, it wasn't a first day of training camp for him reaction. This was a midseason, all systems go reaction where he got away from the free rusher, throws a quick pass, gets the check down to Josh Jacobs to make something out of nothing kind of thing.
Yeah.
You're seeing that already from Jordan Love in the first practice after he, knocks off some of that rust early on. And I think he's got the 2 practices under his belt. The Packers are still dealing with, some shuffling on the offensive line. Zach Tom is not in there at right tackle yet. Elton Jenkins has had some days off. Josh Myers was out for a couple days for a personal issue. It doesn't sound like we're going to see Zach Tom in the 11-on-11 until after family night as he continues the recovery. But I think with Jordan Love getting a couple practices under his belt and now the day off on Monday, heading into Tuesday and the week of practices that is going to culminate with family night, I think we're going to start to see this offense hit its stride, find itself a little bit, and I'm excited to see what it looks like.
I had a moment on Sunday, Mike. It's a little bit more of a, they called it the moderate practice in terms of the tempo and the pace. They go low, high, moderate. And there's a couple instances there where I was able to sort of just scan back and look at this team. And seeing Josh Jacobs in the backfield with Romeo Doubs and Christian Watson and Jaden Reed and Dontavian Wicks at receiver, Bo Melton at receiver, watching Luke Musgrave, run some seam routes. I'm just blown away by the amount of talent, particularly at those skill positions on this football team, because it's not just like, okay, well, they signed Josh Jacobs and a bunch of guys. It's like, this is a lot of homegrown talent the Packers have unearthed. Mm-hmm. That's how you open up a championship window. The questions definitely to answer on the offensive line. Jordan Morgan has been repping inside at right guard. We'll have to see exactly what the future holds for him there. They're giving him a chance to compete for a starting job right out of the gate. Rasheed Walker's been over there at left tackle. Kadeem Telfort has been getting reps with the number one offensive line at right tackle. They've been trying to put this all together to line themselves up for these joint practices, obviously for some of these preseason games, to start identifying what their unit is going to be. But Michael, there's a lot of teams in the National Football League that would look at the Packers situation as a very advantageous one and a luxury for Green Bay to be able to actually have this many questions to answer. Not about, hey, who's making the 53, but ultimately who's going to be those 11 guys on the football field, because it's a tight competition.
Yeah, and I think what makes this on the offensive side of the ball, what makes this so exciting and so interesting and so intriguing and so different from where we've been here in Green Bay over the last, number of years before the transition, is that you're not just looking at Jordan Love and going, okay, we don't really know how good he's going to be. We know he hasn't necessarily hit his peak yet, right. but what is the ceiling? It's kind of unknown. Well, when you look at Christian Watson, Romeo Doubs, Jaden Reed, Dontavian Wicks, Luke Musgrave, you're sort of feeling and saying the same thing about all those guys. When you look back, at a certain point, Greg Jennings became Greg Jennings, and Jordy Nelson and Randall Cobb became who they were, and Devontae Adams, and you go into a certain season, exactly who those guys are going to be and what they're going to give you, right? There are still there's this unknown in terms of the ceiling with these perimeter players that are around Jordan Love, and then there's sort of the question of how does Josh Jacobs fit into this, right? At taking over as the first string running back for Aaron Jones. It's really, really an intriguing place to be. It's a very exciting place to be. And the Packers have a good, handful of weeks here of practices working together, the joint practices coming up, all that kind of stuff to get things figured out and see where this is going to go.
I was doing radio with some friends of mine in Edmonton. I've been talking to these guys since I was at the Green Bay Press-Gazette, and they asked me at the receiver position, like, who's going to be the guy that separates himself? Who's going to be the one that
good luck figuring that out. Right?
Exactly. And the way I liken it to, and I use this analogy with them, to me, it's a dessert menu. I mean, what do you want? Do you want Christian Watson, explosive plays, game-breaking opportunities? Do you want Romeo Doubs, who, as Adam Stenovich told us on Monday, I mean, the way he's running his routes right now, what he's done to have that marry up with his pass-catching ability. I mean, you and I have seen it. We might not be able to break it down like a scout, but it doesn't take a lot to understand just how crisp he's been so far in this camp.
Yeah.
Dontavian Wicks last year was among the league leaders in yards per catch. Jaden Reed was the Packers' leading receiver, as a guy that can be used on end-arounds and is sort of a gadget player in addition to doing the slot. The aspect of it isn't necessarily, okay, who's going to separate themselves. It's just going to be a matter of, okay, how do they tailor this offense and who gets emphasized? And I think one thing that Matt LaFleur proved he could do last year, and these offensive coaches showed they could do, is they can open this thing up and present a lot of different options. So whether or not you want cheesecake or tiramisu, in the Green Bay Packers, there's no shortage of different ways they can go about this thing, and I think that's what makes it exciting for the Packers, and for opposition could make it really tricky if everybody can stay healthy.
Yeah, well, I want to dive into kind of the early updates on some of the different competitions and whatnot that we have our eyes on, a little bit of sponsor business. First, Sirius XM NFL Radio delivers hard-hitting analysis and up-to-the-minute NFL news that true football fanatics need 24/7, 365. And at Cousin Subs, we have something for everyone, like our Wisconsin cheese curds, mac and cheese, golden fries, and creamy shakes, all paired with your favorite sub or sub in a bowl. Cousin Subs, 50-plus years of better. Competition-wise, Wes, the years all start to run together for me after a while, I have to admit.
You've had a lot of them. I mean, there's a lot of seasons.
19th training camp as helping to provide the coverage for Packers.com. I don't know if I can recall now we talk about, competition for roster spots and playing time and all that all the time. I don't know if I can recall a competition for a starting job that feels as wide open and undecided right now as the safety spot does. I'll admit, I went into this thinking Javon Bullard is the guy who's got the edge. He's the second-round pick. He comes from that Kirby Smart Georgia defense, and Packers obviously have liked those kind of players over the years. But Bullard, Evan Williams from Oregon, Anthony Johnson Jr., the seventh-rounder from Iowa State last year, these guys have all been rotating with the number one reps next to Xavier McKinney. Not just that, it's not just the sort of the flat line of where the depth chart is right now, where they're all kind of on the same line, but they're all making plays out there.
Yeah.
Every single guy's had at least one interception. A couple of those guys have had multiple interceptions. The plays that they are making, it's the old adage of, taking advantage of your opportunities when you're given those. And when these guys have been given those opportunities with the number one defense, they're cashing in, and it's making this thing really, I think it's going to make this safety competition perhaps last all the way through camp and all the way through the preseason.
Yeah, and we haven't even seen Ketan Oladapo yet, because of him with the toe injury. What he can potentially add to that, his size, is just absolutely prototype.
Yeah, he's a different body type compared to those other guys, and you're right, we haven't seen him in the mix yet.
And when you go back to the draft, he was the one that everybody was saying is probably your more traditional type free safety type. So to answer your question, no, I don't think so. Especially at the safety position, I think there's a lot of years, Mike, I don't feel like I'm going out too far on a limb saying this, that the way that Anthony Johnson Jr. has performed, he would be a starter in a lot of these seasons that I covered for the Packers at safety. He's been accountable. He's picked up that position so fast, and he's shown some playmaking ability, which when he was making that transition at Iowa State, when he didn't have a lot of interceptions in college, the way he came out last year and got a pick right away when he was playing on the back end.
It makes you wonder, and I'll just say this, we don't know where things are going for Anthony Johnson Jr., but it makes you wonder if he had made that transition from cornerback to safety earlier in his college career, he's probably not a seventh-round draft pick out of Iowa State. He's probably more like, just guessing here, but perhaps a mid-round pick like Evan Williams out of Oregon. Same type of player.
Yeah, and a lot of times, though, like you saw what happened with Micah Hyde, is just cornerbacks are valuable at every level of football, and sometimes your best defensive back needs to play cornerback, and I think Iowa State was in that predicament quite a bit. So, but bringing it all full circle here, it has to be exciting for the Packers in that if let's say something happens where Evan Williams ends up starting at safety, it's not because Javon Bullard doesn't look like that wasn't the right pick for them.
Right.
Javon Bullard's had some big moments too. Both of those guys have interceptions.
No doubt.
Williams just has for 3 in the first 5-6 practices. The guy in so many ways, to use that Micah Hyde analogy again, he reminds me of him just from his headiness, his smarts, his intelligence, his ball skills, his instincts. I was asking him at his locker on Sunday about that play where he intercepted the first play of the 2-minute series with the number 2s against Sean Clifford. He picks off Clifford on the very first snap, and it ends the drill. They just moved on to the number 3s right after that. And I had asked him about that, and the way that he broke it down was, I'm sure it's the way everybody thinks about the safety position, but I never heard it articulated this way. He's like, my number one thing is, he's in a zone cover read there, but he's looking to see how the routes develop, because if he figures out that aspect of it, that helps him with his peripherals, and then he can zero in on where the quarterback is. And by the time he processes all that information, feels like he had the body awareness and the field awareness that when he saw the ball come out from Clifford, it wasn't that he just was going to be able to jump it or be able to catch it. I mean, he felt like it was like Neo in the Matrix. I mean, everything slowed down for him to the point that he just had to execute the assignment. That's the intriguing thing about this, Mike. And I can think of so many times in my 12 years covering this football team when the Packers have overloaded, whether it be through free agency or the draft at certain positions, they get results. 2017, they needed to change things at running back. They did it with both Aaron Jones and Jamal Williams. Countless times the Packers have tripled down on receivers, and they've been able to get NFL talent, and particularly this draft 2 years ago, elite talent in Christian Watson and Romeo Doubs out of it. So I think that's the most exciting thing. And yeah, who will prevail? I don't know, but I have watched enough Packers football and I've seen enough NFL games to know at some point you're going to need all of them. And as much as we will zero in on who's starting and who's going to be out there week 1 in Brazil, the course of a season being what it is, whether it's the slot, whether it's the back end, whether it's special teams, all those guys are going to have an integral role in this thing from day one. And if you're going to make a Super Bowl push, you need those type of contributions from rookies right off the bat.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you think about it, like last year at this time, we weren't talking a whole lot about Carrington Valentine, the 7th-round draft pick at cornerback, and then look how much he ended up having to play, because that's the way NFL seasons go. I want to go back to one other point you just made, though, that last interception by Williams you were talking about. It was on the first play of the number 2 unit's 2-minute drive. And I think that says something about the mentality of these guys who are competing for the safety position, because they've all been rotating with the ones. Well, when it's not their turn with the ones, they're not taking a breather. No. They're not like letting down. Evan Williams is out there with the 2s and he's on the attack, yep. Right? I mean, and that's how you compete. That's how you make an impression. It's not just, I have to give it my all when I'm out there with Xavier McKinney. Mm-hmm. These guys are out there trying to do their thing and make the impression and make this a really difficult decision on the coaches. They're doing that no matter what unit they're lining up with, and I think that's worth mentioning.
And I want to just point this out too very quickly, because someone asked me in Insider Inbox, and it'll be in my column, later this week. You look at how the Packers have structured this thing, and they've rotated all these different safeties next to Xavier McKinney to figure out who the best candidate is, and also to let McKinney get some comfort with who potentially his running mate could be. But the byproduct of that is how many different combinations they've been running with the 2 defense.
Yes.
How many times Evan Williams is able to line up with an Anthony Johnson Jr. or with, Bullard or with Zane Anderson. And that's important too, that all those guys are being able to get that work together, because
that's how they become interchangeable in a sense.
Right. And last year, how often did that happen where due to injuries, there wasn't a single safety last year for the Green Bay Packers that got through unscathed. There was injuries galore.
Yep.
And you hope that it's better this year, won't be that situation again, but you have to have different combinations of guys developing that chemistry with one another.
Well, the other competitions we're certainly watching at cornerback, the starting cornerback job opposite Jair Alexander, Eric Stokes, Carrington Valentine. Both guys have certainly had their moments out there. Stokes is getting more of the reps with the number 1s right now than Valentine is, but it's just 1 week into camp, and who knows if there becomes more of a rotation there or how that might change. So we will definitely be keeping an eye on that. At kicker, the 3 kickers, I think it's fair to say that Greg Joseph and Anders Carlson are very much neck and neck at the front of that kicking competition, and James Turner is kind of trying to make up a little ground right now after 1 week of camp. On the offensive line, as I mentioned before, some moving parts, some shuffling going on, but it still appears to be shaping up that Jordan Morgan and Sean Ryan are going to be competing for the starting job at right guard. And we'll just have to see. It's extremely early in that regard, and certainly with Morgan making the transition from tackle to guard, and the pads having now just gone on for a couple of days, that's another one to watch as things go along. Not really a whole lot to update there, other than it does look like it's pretty open in terms of just may the best man win.
Yeah, and the other thing I'm keeping an eye on is right tackle, because Zach Tom, even though you are expecting, he'll be out there soon enough, be back in those team drills, Tom is one of the first pieces that get moved when injuries hit.
That's right.
Last year he stepped in. Remember that one game where he's at right tackle? I think Josh Myers, did he actually get hurt, or was it like an equipment issue? He had to go out.
Yeah, it might have just been like an equipment thing.
Zach Tom's on the sideline snapping with Sean Clifford, then snapping with Jordan Love, and he moves inside. That is one of the first dominoes that could potentially fall here, depending on how Packers want to handle things. Although, to be fair, Elton Jenkins also has that versatility.
Yep.
So who could potentially be the swing tackle? That's where the competition happens with Telford. We also now with Caleb Jones being back, Telford, excuse me. And then, Andre Dillard is in this thing. Number of different ways this thing can go for the Green Bay Packers, and trying to figure out, who those guys are going to be, because on game day, you'll have those 8 offensive linemen, you'll have your starting 5, but who are those next 3 guys up that could be summoned? And that's what they're looking to identify right now.
Yeah. Well, before we go, anything that's sort of at the top of your list in terms of what you're going to be watching for as week 2 of training camp starts to unfold here?
It was fun watching padded one-on-ones for the first time.
Yeah.
Offensive and defensive line, that's typically where I'm at.
Usually I'm watching the pass catchers, pass defenders one-on-ones, which is like when it's a tight end, it's usually a safety, and then obviously wideouts, versus corners and stuff. And it was fun to see that for the first time, with the pads on. That's where the intensity of practice, ratchets up a little bit, and these guys really get into it.
Well, and as you said it yourself on some of our other content, I can't remember if it was Unscripted or a different show we do, but it's so hard to be able to. And Matt LaFleur echoed these comments. It's hard to be able to rush to a bunch of conclusions in shells about offensive line and defensive line.
Absolutely.
The game changes once those pads come on. As LaFleur joked, there's a little bit more cloth that can get grabbed in those moments as well. And for me, seeing how, dominant, some of these guys have been, okay, how does that translate now that these guys have these pads on? And in the first day I watched it, I thought Jordan Morgan was one of the all-stars of it. He had a really tough task taking on Devontae Wyatt. Wyatt hit him with 2 very different techniques, a bull rush the second time, a little bit more finesse the first time, and he stood up to that. Colby Wooden, I thought, had some really good rushes. Carl Brooks looked sensational. But then you even have, Sean Ryan being able to match up with a Kenny Clark, a Kadeem Telford being able to match up with a Rashawn Gary. Those are important reps because Telford's probably seen him in some of these, practice squad reps and scout team reps, but it's different, man, when you got that bull looking you in the eyes and one of the most intense physical players on this football team.
And there's no help on either side. It truly is one-on-one out there.
So the thing I take away from it, I'm never going to be a person that's like, oh, here's the wins and losses, but it's seeing how those guys respond to that, getting a chance to get a better feel for that this week's going to be fun, in addition to the fact that, we're in this thing now. We're a week into training camp. This thing is no longer starting. We are moving, and the Packers are looking at family night, and soon enough, we'll be looking at that preseason opener in Cleveland.
Yeah, that first preseason game is right around the corner. But for now, we will call it a wrap on this edition of Packers Unscripted. Be sure to continue to follow all of our coverage of the goings-on at training camp. We've got it all for you on Packers.com. For Wes, I am Mike. Thank you for tuning in, everybody. We will see you next time.